we think that we can win, we could win something in a sense of housing, but the people may not get racial justice. Or what happens, if you can push forward on racial justice, but it has a weak gender analysis, or it has a weak class analysis, and I'm stuck. There's a lot of gray areas there, and so I think that all of these issues are really important. But it doesn't mean that the audience, or it doesn't mean that the current socio-political landscape that you're in is going to be sophisticated enough or developed enough to be able to handle those conversations. Because frankly, just putting it out there, in Madison, I wonder if it's too much to get some of these white people to really understand race and class at the same time, right? I think they'll get behind, people shouldn't be homeless, but then if you say, well, what about black people? They're like, huh? You know what I mean? Or wait a minute, back up. So do you take the gains around housing if they don't specifically acknowledge black people? Those are complicated questions, but those are some of the things that we actually have to deal with, considering that we're black leadership, and what that means for us in our organizing work.
All right, so we're wrapping up. We're running out of time. I do want to take another moderator's prerogative here to address a couple of the questions. To start with, on the relationship between rural land takeovers versus urban land takeovers, people are often surprised to hear that Take Back the Land started in 2006. Not 2008, 2009, 2011, and Take Back in 2006, when the housing boom was going on in the United States. And when we did that, what the media was calling the housing boom, and people were celebrating, as we saw in the video, as a way of getting rich, us in low-income, particularly low-income black communities, were suffering the underbelly of that, which was gentrification. We're getting priced out of our... So Take Back the Land actually started not by taking over homes, but we actually started by liberating vacant land. And we built an urban shanty town in Miami, Florida. And I know shanty towns are not anything unusual in the world. In the United States, they are very, very unusual, and they're very unusual to be built openly and publicly. So we did that. If I could do a moment of shameless self-promotion, we also wrote a book about the urban shanty town called Take Back the Land, and it's out there on particular stuff. We talked about what that experience was like, and also then how that transitioned, the very beginning of how that transitioned into what now people know as Take Back the Land, which is a takeover of housing. Real quick on what comes next. M has properly identified, the Community Land Trust as a vehicle that we talked about and developed as an idea that we can go from where we are now to the next step. However, we want to make a couple things clear. One is the Community Land Trust is merely a tool. Community Land Trusts don't work in every setting, they don't work in every community, and it might mean something different in one community than it does in another. I think one of the scary but also very exciting points or things about this moment in history is that we don't know yet what we can demand and achieve. So most people here are familiar with the Montgomery bus boycott, which was the bus boycott that Martin Luther King participated in the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks, of course, the buses were segregated in Montgomery, Alabama, which means black people, when we got in, we had to sit in the back of the bus. And Rosa Parks gets on the bus, she sits close to the front, a white man comes in, sits behind her, and she has to get up and sit behind him. And she refuses to get up, so she was arrested for that. Martin Luther King comes down, they start a big protest, and that changes U.S. history. What was the demand? Who knows what the demand was when Martin Luther King came down and started that thing? What was the demand? Did anyone know? In Montgomery? Buses are segregated, we arrest Rosa Parks because she refused to get up for segregation. Anyone else? I'm sorry? What races?
House wage.
No, it wasn't. It was around the buses. So most people think that the demand was to end segregation, so that it was legal for blacks to sit wherever we want on the bus. But for the Montgomery bus boycott, that was not the demand. The demand, the slogan for the Montgomery bus boycott, if you're ready for this, is segregation with dignity. That was the demand. You can look it up. The Martin Luther King walked around signs that didn't say desegregation and equality for the races. It said segregation with dignity. When they had the organizing meeting, someone suggested we should demand the end of segregation and racial equality. And people in the meeting called them a communist and kicked them out. Because at the time that the Montgomery bus boycott started in 1954, right? 54. it was unrealistic to think that we could win the demand of desegregation. Only a fool thought in 1954 that we could win the demand of desegregation. By 1956, there's no organization in the United States that would have made a demand of segregation with dignity. None. The world had completely changed between 1954 and 1956. I think we were in that same moment, and I think we made a big mistake in the United States when people started demanding principal reduction as a demand, because that was a great win for 2007 and 2008. But by 2010, 2011, that was a terrible, terrible win.
It was backwards.
It was too limiting in that respect. I think in the same way, we don't know yet exactly what is going to come next. We know we don't want the banks to own it. We know we don't want the government to own it. But I don't think we're fully thought out exactly, other than community land trust, which we don't think is the final thing. We're fully prepared to say today we want community land trust, and in 5 years or 10 years to turn back and say no one should be demanding community land trust except for sellouts. So we may not know exactly what the next step is, but we don't need to know. We actually want the moment of history to take us, and we need to be flexible enough to enhance our demands when they are there. Last thing, real quick, for race, I know we're about to get kicked out of here. On the race thing has been a very significant issue, and I think Em was right about our inability to separate race and class. One of the things that we saw in the U.S. was the heavy emphasis in the foreclosure crisis with home ownership. 70% of whites in the United States own their own home or live in a house that they own. There's never been more than 50% of whites or Hispanics who own their home. So home ownership is fundamentally a white middle class issue. And you can understand if you're white and middle class why you would want that as an issue, because that's the way you were raised, that's the way you brought up, that's the way you were thinking about it. But most people of color would think about things in terms of rent control or public or social housing or something else like that. And yet the demands have not gone around that. The demand for example, debt cancellation for student loans. Very important demand. It's a demand that I support. It's a demand I think is important. But most black people do not go to college. And it is fundamentally a white middle class demand, not a black or people of color demand. And when demands are raised, if the demands reflect the needs and wants and situations of the white middle class, then that's not going to be a movement that the majority of people of color can or should get behind. And we need white people to fight just as hard for the demands that will not benefit them as they fight for the demands that will benefit them. And that is not happening right now. And it's happening, room is not being made for leadership of black and other people of color in our movements. So I want to thank all the participants here, and also I want to thank all of you and one of you. So we have two wonderful social movements here, Take Back the Land and the PA, so we want to exchange our organizational t-shirts. We'll take them home and share them with our members. So thank you all for coming.
Como si fuera un partido de fútbol.
Sí, es que se lo dijo por Skype. Sí.
There you go.
Great.
So, this is the only size.
No, tengo, espera.
No, él no tenía otro.
Es igual.